Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Judge Clarence Thomas corner Jasmine Crockett, shocked on live. The hearing room was tense, the kind of silence that doesn't just fall but presses down like a heavy weight. Cameras lined the walls, reporters scribbled notes, and millions watched live across the country. In the center sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her hands calmly folded on the desk, though everyone could sense the storm rising. Across from her, Supreme Court Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Clarence Thomas leaned forward, their tone sharp, their questions circling like hawks over prey. Congresswoman Crockett, Barrett's voice cut through the room, measured but edged, "Do you really believe your position aligns with the Constitution?" Thomas followed, his words like a hammer. "Or is this simply another performance, another attempt to bend the law to your own view of justice?" The audience murmured. Crockett was cornered, two of the most powerful judicial voices in America pressing her under the brightest spotlight. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice steady, almost soft. "Justice Barrett, Justice Thomas, with all due respect, I didn't take an oath to perform. I took an oath to serve, to fight for those who don't have the privilege of sitting in this chamber." For a moment, there was quiet. But Thomas smirked, ready to pounce. "And what exactly does service look like to you, Congresswoman?" Protests. Sound bites. The crowd braced for a clash. But Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't fire back with insults. Instead, she told a story. "When I was a child in Texas," she began, "my neighbor Mrs. Ellis worked 3 jobs just to keep her lights on. She never asked for charity. She asked for fairness, the chance to work hard and still be able to feed her kids. I remember sitting on her porch one night, hearing her cry because her paycheck still wasn't enough. I promised myself then, if I ever had the chance to speak in rooms like this, I wouldn't just speak for me. I'd speak for her, for all the unseen people whose names will never appear in history books, but whose lives deserve dignity." Her words carried no theatrics, just truth. The cameras zoomed closer. Even the judges sat still. For once, no interruptions. Then she did something no one expected. She turned directly to Thomas. "Justice Thomas, you once spoke about growing up poor in Georgia, about walking to school barefoot. You know what it means to fight your way up when the world seems determined to push you down. Tell me, if you were still that little boy today, wouldn't you want someone in this chamber fighting for you?" The room froze. Thomas opened his mouth but no words came. His eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something unguarded, almost human. Jasmine turned next to Barrett. "And Justice Barrett, you've spoken about the importance of family, about raising your children with love and values. Families like Mrs. Ellis's deserve that same stability, don't they?" Barrett shifted uncomfortably, caught between the question and the truth she couldn't deny. The tension broke, not with an outburst, but with silence. Heavy, meaningful, the kind that changes something in everyone listening. Then, from the back of the chamber, an elderly man stood up. No one knew him, but his voice carried strong. "She's right. We need more people who remember the human side of the law." Others nodded. Applause rippled through the gallery, growing until the room itself seemed to rise with it. Reporters stopped scribbling and simply listened. Even Barrett and Thomas, though stone-faced, couldn't hide the weight of what had just happened. For the first time, they weren't cornering Jasmine. She had cornered them, not with power, but with compassion. As the hearing closed, Jasmine left not as a politician who had survived a grilling, but as a leader who had reminded a nation that justice without humanity is no justice at all. And when the cameras cut off, the whispers began. Maybe we need more voices like hers. Maybe kindness really is power. In a world that often celebrates the loudest insults and sharpest comebacks, Jasmine Crockett proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon is empathy, the kind that pierces even the toughest armor. And that day, live on television, millions witnessed how one act of compassion could shift an entire room. Message: true strength isn't found in dominance or intimidation, it's found in the courage to see humanity in one another. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled through the chamber like a tide that refused to retreat. Reporters looked at one another, stunned. It wasn't every day that a congressional hearing turned into something that felt more like a sermon, something that touched not just the mind, but the heart. Jasmine didn't stand to soak it in. She sat quietly, her eyes lowered for a moment, as if remembering every name and every story she carried with her. When the crowd finally settled, she lifted her gaze, her voice steady once again. You see, this isn't about left or right. It's not even about winning arguments. It's about remembering why we are here at all. We can quote the law, we can interpret it, we can debate it until the sun goes down. But at the end of the day, if the people outside these walls, the teachers, the nurses, the truck drivers, the single mothers, if they don't feel seen, then what is the point of all this? Her words landed like arrows in the silence. For once, the judges weren't the ones leading. They were listening, truly listening. And then came the unexpected. Justice Barrett leaned into her microphone. Her tone softened, just barely. Congresswoman Crockett, I may not agree with every position you take. But I do understand what you're saying. Family, dignity, those are principles we can all respect. Gasps spread across the chamber. A Supreme Court justice, offering even the slightest agreement to a sitting congresswoman on live television, it was unheard of. Jasmine nodded respectfully. And that's all I ask, Justice Barrett. That we start from the place of humanity before we build our walls of ideology. Thomas, still quiet, seemed to wrestle with something deeper. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. You remind me of my grandfather. He always told me, don't forget where you came from, boy. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and for a fleeting second, Clarence Thomas wasn't a justice. He was just a man remembering the dirt roads of his childhood. The audience went still, and Jasmine smiled. Not a victorious smile, not smugness, but the kind of smile that comes when walls begin to crack. Then perhaps, Justice, we can honor our grandparents best by making sure no child in this country feels invisible. It was subtle, but there it was, a shift. The hearing adjourned. Cameras cut to commercial, but something lingered in the air. Something different from the bitterness and division people had expected when they tuned in. Reporters filed out, whispering about what had just unfolded. Viewers at home replayed Jasmine's words on social media. Clips went viral within hours. If the people don't feel seen, then what is the point of all this? Commentators called it one of the most human moments ever captured in a congressional chamber. Later that night, a woman in Detroit posted a video of herself crying, saying, I've worked 3 jobs just like Mrs. Ellis, and for the first time I felt like somebody was speaking for me. A truck driver in Oklahoma echoed, that woman told my story today. Finally, somebody gets it. It wasn't about politics anymore, it was about connection. And that was Jasmine's quiet victory. Not that she had out-argued 2 Supreme Court justices, but that she had reminded millions watching that compassion still has a place in leadership. That listening still has a place in power. That empathy still has a place in justice. The next morning's headlines didn't read, Crockett defeated, or, judges triumphant. They read, a hearing turned human. Jasmine Crockett's words stopped the nation in its tracks. And so the story ends not with a knockout punch, but with something far stronger, an opening of eyes and hearts. Because the truth is this. Laws can govern a nation, but only love and empathy can bind it together. And on that day, before the eyes of millions, Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend her beliefs. She defended the forgotten, the unseen, and in doing so, reminded America of its greatest strength, our shared humanity. Narration note. Read slowly, with natural pauses after key lines like, if the people don't feel seen, then what is the point of all this? And, don't forget where you came from, boy. That pacing will bring the story to a full 10 to 12 minutes. The next few days felt different. It wasn't just politics as usual, it was something bigger. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's words circled the internet like wildfire. Cable networks replayed the moment Thomas froze, the instant Barrett softened, the quiet courage of a congresswoman who didn't raise her voice but raised the bar. But the most powerful reactions didn't come from politicians. They came from everyday people. In Baltimore, a teacher paused her lesson, pulled up the video, and told her students, look at this. This is how you fight. With truth, with dignity. You don't have to shout to be strong. In Chicago, a group of young law students held a late-night watch party, whispering among themselves, maybe we chose the right profession after all. Maybe justice can still mean something. And in a small town in Mississippi, a grandfather leaned back in his chair, eyes misty, as he heard Thomas's words. "Don't forget where you came from, boy." He whispered to his grandson, "That's what I always told your daddy." And now it's on television for the whole world to hear. Suddenly, what had started as a tense hearing became something else, a mirror. A reminder, a reckoning. The very next week, Jasmine received a letter. Handwritten, the envelope worn, the script shaky. It was from Mrs. Ellis's youngest daughter, the same woman Jasmine had spoken about in her testimony. It read, "I watched you tell my mama's story on live TV. She's gone now, but I want you to know, you kept your promise. You made her life matter. And for the first time, I believe someone in that chamber was fighting for us." Jasmine held the letter close, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. For all the noise, all the cameras, all the headlines, that letter was the only evidence she needed that her words had made a difference. Behind closed doors, staffers whispered that Barrett had begun pushing for broader discussions about family protections in certain legal arguments. And Thomas, though still stern, still stubborn, had privately remarked to a colleague, "Sometimes compassion makes a stronger case than the law books." No one would have believed it a month earlier. Yet here they were, judges who once cornered Jasmine Crockett now quietly carrying pieces of her message with them. Change doesn't always happen in the form of sweeping rulings or fiery speeches. Sometimes it begins as a crack in the armor, a seed planted in soil that no one thought would ever grow. That day in the chamber, Jasmine Crockett planted something. And the proof was everywhere. In classrooms, in kitchens, in quiet conversations across the country. One evening, Jasmine was invited to a small community center back in her hometown. No cameras, no microphones, just neighbors gathered on folding chairs. As she stood before them, a little girl tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "I saw you on TV. You sounded like my mom." Jasmine knelt down, eye to eye with the girl. "Then you remember this, sweetheart," she said softly. "No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you matter. Don't ever forget that." The room fell silent. People smiled through their tears. And at that moment, the story came full circle. The child who once sat on Mrs. Ellis's porch now stood as a voice of hope for the next generation. And so the lesson wasn't about victory in an argument, or even about politics at all. It was about something deeper. That kindness, spoken with courage, has the power to soften the hardest hearts, to bridge the widest divides, to remind a nation of the humanity it sometimes forgets. On that day, in that chamber, Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer two of the most powerful judges in America. She answered the question every citizen carries quietly inside. Does my life matter to those in power? And with grace, she gave them the only answer that matters. Yes, you matter. You've always mattered. This continuation takes us into the aftershocks of her words, grounding the story in human responses, and then closes on an uplifting, emotional note perfect for narration. Weeks passed, but the echo of that hearing did not fade. In fact, it grew louder. Universities began holding forums titled, "The Crockett Effect." Students debated how empathy could change the face of law and governance. Professors who usually lectured about statutes and precedents found themselves quoting her words instead. If the people don't feel seen, then what is the point of all this? Even late-night talk shows, usually filled with jokes and satire, played the clip, not to mock, but to marvel. One host leaned into the camera and said, "For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a politician up there. I saw a leader." But what truly surprised Jasmine were the letters. Not one, not 10, but thousands. Handwritten notes, emails, even crayon drawings from children. Letters from farmers in Iowa, single parents in Brooklyn, nurses in Toronto, veterans in Birmingham, community organizers in London. They all carried the same message: "Thank you for speaking for us." One came from a man in Canada who had lost his job during the pandemic. He wrote, "When you spoke about Mrs. Ellis, I thought of my wife crying at the kitchen table, wondering how we'd pay rent. You didn't just speak for Americans that day. You spoke for families everywhere who feel forgotten." Jasmine read each letter carefully, often late into the night, sometimes with tears running silently down her face. At the annual judicial conference, a gathering usually marked by dry speeches and rigid tradition, Justice Barrett mentioned Crockett by name. She said, Congresswoman Crockett reminded us that the law must serve real people. It cannot exist in a vacuum. Whether we agree with her politics or not, she spoke a truth that every jurist should reflect upon. Even Thomas, though less forthcoming, was heard by aides saying, "That woman, she made me think of home again. It's been a long time since I thought about those days." The very judges who once cornered her were now carrying her words like an imprint they couldn't shake. Months later, Jasmine visited a women's shelter in Washington, D.C. A small crowd gathered as she walked through the hall, shaking hands, listening to stories. One woman, frail but fierce in spirit, reached out and grabbed Jasmine's hand. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You made the powerful stop and listen. That means maybe, just maybe, they'll listen to us too." Jasmine knelt, just as she had with the little girl before, and replied, "They will. And until they do, I'll keep speaking." The room erupted in applause, not the applause of politics, but the applause of hope. From that moment, something shifted not only in Congress, but across the country. Lawmakers who had never agreed before began meeting quietly to discuss practical reforms: childcare credits, fair wages, education grants. Small steps, yes, but steps nonetheless. And while the divisions of politics didn't vanish overnight, a seed had been planted in the national heart, the idea that compassion could cut deeper than confrontation. Years from now, people might not remember every headline or every hearing. But they would remember that one moment, when a congresswoman, cornered by two of the most powerful judges in America, chose not to fight with anger, but with empathy. And that empathy turned a hearing into history. Because sometimes, the loudest message is spoken softly. Sometimes, the greatest victory is not in winning an argument, but in winning back our shared humanity. And Jasmine Crockett did exactly that. Now the story flows from the chamber right pointing arrow to her community right pointing arrow to the nation right pointing arrow and finally into a long-lasting legacy.